all of these different tools that you see from different like search and recommendations widgets that are on the website, all of them tend to be powered by AI. And they're generally referred to what we call like a personalization service, which just refers to the fact of taking the generic shopping experience in e-commerce and personalizing it based on your behavior on a website.
Welcome to the Conversations on Applied AI podcast, where Justin Grammons and the team at Emerging Technologies North talk with experts in the fields of artificial intelligence and deep learning. In each episode, we cut through the hype and dive into how these technologies are being applied to real-world problems today. We hope that you find this episode educational and applicable to your industry, and connect with us to learn more about our organization at appliedai.mn. Enjoy.
Welcome, everyone, to the Conversations on Applied AI podcast. Today, we're talking with Cameron Wolfe. Cameron has a passion for leveraging academic research and industry to solve large-scale industrial problems. He is currently the director of AI at Rebuy, personalized search and recommendations platform for D2C e-commerce brands, where he works with an amazing team of engineers and researchers. He holds a PhD in computer science from Rice University and a bachelor's in computer science from UT Austin. Finally, he's an avid fan of mixed martial arts, MMA, and is actively training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He enjoys exercising and going for walks, runs, or hikes nearly every day, preferably with his dog Theodore and his fiancée Sarah. Some of his other random interests include brewing, roasting coffee, reading books, and cooking. So I love it. It's going to be a great conversation, Cameron. Sounds like you've got quite the rounded life, and thank you for being on the Applied AI podcast today.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the invite.
Cool. Well, I talked a little bit about, being the director of AI at Rebuy, but maybe you can bring our listeners up to speed with regards to, kind of how you got into that position and maybe what the trajectory of your career has been.
Yep, definitely. So I got into AI quite a while ago, but pretty recent compared to a lot of other people. But when I started my undergrad in 2016 at UT Austin, I came in as like a mechanical engineer, I guess. Mm-hmm. So I knew I wanted to be some form of engineer, but I had no idea what discipline. So I kind of did that at first and then quickly realized that I really enjoyed computer science through a research lab that I became a part of. So at UT Austin, one of the cool things about the university is that for freshmen, they have this awesome thing called the Freshman Research Initiative. It's like a first year undergrad to get involved with legitimate academic research. And I joined FRI, or the Freshman Research Initiative, and ended up in a stream, or they call it a stream. It's just like a lab for freshmen that did research in neural networks. So I had taken pretty much zero computer science classes at that point. So I went in kind of backwards. I started with neural networks and then learned about everything else afterwards. But yeah, I got involved in that stream. I was doing research and optimizing neural networks with like gradient-free methods. And I loved it so much that I ended up switching my major to computer science. I continued doing research with the lab that I was affiliated with throughout all of undergrad, published a couple papers with them, and just got really interested in it. And I've been kind of addicted to all of the AI stuff ever since. So in terms of Rebuy, basically the way that I got into that position is that somewhere during undergrad, I think after my junior year, I got an internship with Salesforce on their commerce platform. So I wrote during that internship some of their content-based recommendation algorithms. So content-based means just, recommending products that are similar to products that the user is looking at. All of that was just based upon like different forms of BERT models that use like images and product descriptions and text as input. So I worked on recommendation algorithms at Salesforce for a very long time after that. I was an intern for 2 years almost, year-round at Salesforce. I stayed on after like the first summer that I interned there. And that internship, just working with them, went into my PhD. So I worked for them for quite a while, worked for a different startup during my PhD. And then once I graduated my PhD, I wanted to get back into the e-commerce space. So now I'm the director of AI at Rebuy, where I am again working on recommendation algorithms and search algorithms of different kinds.
That's awesome. Yeah, we'll get into Rebuy here a little bit later with regards to what specifically, the product does and how your team works on it. But I'm just kind of curious, you kind of went through the whole academia side, getting your PhD and everything like that. Did you ever consider maybe staying in academia and teaching this stuff, or what kind of drew you into the industry?
Yeah, definitely. So I enjoyed my time doing research, especially, during my PhD when I got to devote full-time effort to doing research, or I guess kind of part-time because I did have a job during my PhD. But yeah, I definitely enjoyed it. I think the main thing that turned me off from it was the publication process. So coming in as a first year PhD student, I think within my first 3 or 4 semesters, I tried to publish 4 or 5 papers. And typically what happens is that your papers get rejected multiple times, and then you have to constantly revise them and resubmit and so forth. And since there's so many people doing AI research, the bar for papers that get accepted is just incredibly high. And the review process is very noisy because they have to ask a lot of people to review, even if they're like first year PhD students, for example, because there's so many papers being submitted. So the review process in general was just very noisy, very difficult, very demotivating. And throughout all of that, I realized that I love doing research, but I really dislike having to formally publish that research inside of a conference, for example. So yeah, I mean, part of any position, even in industry, you're doing research. It's just you might not have publications associated with it. You're mostly just trying to find what works and deploying it into whatever platform you're working on. So for me, that's kind of a perfect mix. But I think the interesting thing about myself is that I really enjoy teaching AI to other people. So I have a newsletter that I write, for example, where I try and distill, topics and research to make them more understandable to people. And I love doing that. It's one of my favorite things. So I could see myself, for example, maybe teaching classes at a university eventually if I can figure out a way to do that, but probably unlikely that I'm going to be devoting very significant effort towards publishing papers and conferences anymore, just because of my experience. It kind of took the fun out of it for me personally.
Totally get it. No, I think you and I have a fair amount of things in common. I mean, I actually am an adjunct at the University of St. Thomas here in St. Paul. And so like you, I think I do actually like to give back and teach people about this stuff. But it's not something I would want to make my career out of. Maybe once I get to be 65 or something like that, I want to kind of ride off into the sunset, maybe teaching at a university and doing research. But I'm really more about, I think, hands-on applications, right? And actually being able to move fast. It feels like sometimes at a university, you can be tied in, especially if you're on salary and all other things, but I would consider being an adjunct as possibly something in your future. You can kind of have the best of both worlds. Yeah. The other thing is the newsletter. We have an Applied AI newsletter. So I'll definitely send you a link for that, but we will include, the links to whatever links you want to send me. So all of our listeners can subscribe to your newsletter. So anything we talk about here in this program, we'll make sure to have links in the show liner notes. What was your thesis on for your PhD? Was it around this area of recommendation engines?
No. So a little bit of it was. I had some papers that I wrote at Salesforce that were more specific to recommendation engines, but for the most part, including those in my thesis was a bit of a touchy subject just because of IP issues. So they're out there on archive. You can find them on my website, but they weren't formally part of my thesis, I guess. But my thesis in general, it's a bit of a Frankenstein thesis is what they call it. So it doesn't have one unified topic. But in general, it's focused on the idea that I really like, which is just how can we find practical and simple tricks to make training and using neural networks more easy. So there are a couple of different things, but in general, when I look at the space of things that people propose and what actually ends up being used, there are 3 major considerations that go into whether something that you propose is actually useful. One of them is cost. So if it's super expensive, people aren't going to use it. Similarly, time is an issue. So there are multiple forms of cost. The other is performance. So whether it performs really well, obviously, if something that you propose doesn't perform well, then nobody's going to use it because it's kind of worthless. And then the final one is just simplicity. So oftentimes you'll see modifications or techniques that people propose in research, and they work really well. But practically, the cost of implementation is very high and the risk of bugs is very high or something like that. So the adoption would be less so than if it was a simple technique that achieved similar performance. So all of the different papers that I proposed throughout my thesis, there's something kind of in that area. I have a couple of different pruning papers. So just taking large neural networks and making them smaller without sacrificing their performance. Most of those papers were kind of provable pruning techniques. So they come with theoretical guarantees, but are still practically usable. I looked into quantized training techniques for neural networks. So right now we see a lot of post-training quantization with LLMs and so forth. There is some like during training quantization, but my research looked into basically treating the level of precision that you use during training as a hyperparameter schedule so that you're constantly and dynamically varying the precision while you're training the neural network, which is pretty interesting. And I have some other papers on hyperparameter schedules as well, but in general, hyperparameter schedules are just something that's super simple, that there's a lot of cool things that you could do and get some gains in efficiency. And then finally, I looked some into streaming learning, which is basically instead of just performing a bunch of epochs over a fixed data set like we normally do to train a neural network, you consider a stream of incoming data. So you're getting one new example at a time and trying to figure out how to train your neural network that way. And I had like a big paper where I talked about just simple techniques for applying that to deep learning using like data augmentation and something called a replay mechanism, which just caches data and kind of forms mini batches by sampling data that you've seen so far. And that one actually has like proofs with it as well, which was pretty interesting because I tried to do it thinking that it would be impossible to prove something in a setup like that, and then ended up getting something which was cool. So a lot of different stuff, but like at a high level, it's just looking at common problems that you might have with neural networks and trying to propose simple stuff that you could use that would be practically valuable.
Yeah, fascinating. Really cool. Spans the gamut of a lot of different areas. Yeah, the class I teach at the university actually is focused around machine learning and IoT. And so really talking with students about how to make their machine learning models as small as possible, because it's usually running on something that might be battery powered or something that is a cellular connected. So you want to make sure it's, that the model uses the least amount of memory as possible and is as small as possible. So some of these methods that you're talking about sort of, I think, ring true, although I've not thought about it doing it while you're training, right? A lot of these things get optimized after you kind of run it through an additional step. So fascinating. Yeah. Is any of this stuff published at all? Maybe, after this, you could definitely send me some links if there's anything you want me to include around these papers that you did for your thesis.
Yeah, most of it is published. I think there are probably, well, not most, I would say about half of it is published. I think it's 5 papers in total and 3 of them have been published so far. So yeah, cool. We're getting there. The other ones still need to just be resubmitted over and over again until they get published, I guess.
Yeah, sure. And that can be a big process. The other thing too, I'm not sure if you know, is that we do monthly meetups with the Applied AI group, and we also have a conference. So we should touch base if you at all want to present anything that you or somebody at Rebuy wants to talk about how it's being applied too. Definitely like to get you guys on the schedule. Sounds like you've gone deep on a lot of this stuff. So let's talk about Rebuy. Maybe you can enlighten our listeners with regards to what Rebuy does.
Yeah, definitely. So Rebuy is an e-commerce company. So basically we're trying to take all of the tools that an e-commerce site like Nike would have with respect to AI and provide them in an easy to use manner to anybody who is not Nike. So if you go on Nike's website, which I'm just using this as an example, given that Nike has a huge engineering team and an awesome like AI powered personalization service on their website, basically like you can search stuff. It will use like AI powered search to bring up relevant results, probably learning from things that you've looked at on the website to optimize the search results and so forth. And then the same thing for any recommendations that are displayed on the website. They have AI powered recommendations widgets that are displayed, whether it be for like complete the set. So displaying bundles of products that go well together, or just, populating top selling products that you're likely to want to buy based on what you've viewed in the current session and so forth. So all of these different tools that you see from different like search and recommendations widgets that are on the website, all of them tend to be powered by AI, and they're generally referred to what we call like a personalization service, which just refers to the fact of taking the generic shopping experience in e-commerce and personalizing it based on your behavior on a website. So you could think, for example, if you're someone who goes and buys your coffee from like an online store, if you're someone who typically buys whole bean coffee, and then you go to the search bar and search Kona coffee, for example, the first thing that comes up should not be K-cups. If you have like a good personalization algorithm, it will pull up Kona coffee, but it'll pull up the whole bean coffee because that's what you tend to purchase in the past, right? So there's a lot that goes into it, but the entire goal is trying to take search and recommendation algorithms and basically personalize them based on data that we have about a user Typically, we don't use like any cookie data as well, which like people, that used to be the way that people do it. But cookies obviously are not as widely accessible now. So the cool thing about Rebuy is we don't really depend on that. All of our stuff is based on just session data. So if you're logged into a website and we have purchase history, that's great. But most of it is just based upon how you're interacting with the website. And it will dynamically decide like what products to show you based on that, which is really cool. So that's what personalization is. Rebuy specializes in that area for search and recommendations. But practically how it's actually used is mostly on Shopify. We have a multi-platform offering now, so it could be beyond Shopify. But Rebuy's core product as of right now is a Shopify app that you can download and put onto, whatever website is selling stuff on Shopify. And really what you can do is take some of the tools that we provide and configure them to exactly how you want your recommendations and search to work on your website. So it's not just a one algorithm fits all type of thing. So we provide a bunch of different tools that you could use for personalization. We provide a default like recommendations and search algorithm. But within our portal, we, for every like widget or just like front end recommendation section that you put on your website, we provide what we call data sources. And really what this is just the ability to define exact business logic of how you want recommendations to be served on that page. So you could just like use our default recommendation algorithm, but oftentimes if you're a SaaS provider in recommendations and search, one algorithm is not going to work well for 7,000 different merchants, right? Everybody is going to have unique considerations and everybody is going to want to customize the algorithm in one way or another. So through our data sources, basically they can go in and for every place where they're, providing recommendations or even for the search experience, you can personalize it as well. You can go in and define rules based on all of the metrics that we have on your website and just configure exactly how you want your search or recommendations to be served. So for recommendations, this could be, like just saying if this product is what the user is viewing right now. So if it's on this product page, you could serve one algorithm. And then if you're on a different product page, you could serve a different algorithm. You could customize it based on collections. There's pretty much an arbitrarily like number of ways that you could customize it. You could even define rules on the URL where like, if you send a text message marketing campaign, you could have multiple different URLs that like redirect to personalized populated cart and recommendation pages based on different URLs so that you kind of can segment customers and personalize in that manner. And then same thing for search. There's a bunch of different customizations. You could define like keywords, synonyms, do product promotions based on keywords, just all of the different things that you would need to personalize and merchandise an e-commerce store.
Sounds super powerful, actually. And so just with regards to the Nike analogy, you guys are bringing then that power, everything you're talking about, kind of to the SMB market, right? Anybody with a Shopify, e-commerce website now has all these tools at their disposal, so they don't have a full team like Nike does, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the beautiful thing is that you don't need really an AI team to make any of this work. So we actually just launched an A/B testing studio within our platform as well, which is really cool. Because my view for how Rebuy should work is that basically we provide all of these different AI powered tools that can optimize a website so that someone who is running like, some SMB brand, now we have like bigger brands. So it's not always the case. Sometimes our customers have engineering teams, but like you could think that if somebody is running their brand, they're not an AI expert, but they want to use these cutting edge personalization tools that Nike has. My vision has always been that Rebuy would kind of be the tool that can plug in, that you can optimize and implement all of these policies without having any AI expertise. And the way that we do that is by making all of the tools kind of intuitive to understand. So providing health documents where people can really understand what the purpose of each tool is without an AI background, which in e-commerce a lot of the times is more than possible. And then basically providing very detailed metrics, analytics, and A/B testing functionality so that people can try these different functionalities and then pick the best ones that work for their website over time. So really using Rebuy, somebody could, implement different policies, try out different AI-powered tech to personalize their website, and then slowly over time optimize what they're doing based on, rigorous analytics on their website so that they know what they're doing actually works and is yielding some kind of ROI in terms of like average order value, customer retention, or something like that.
Yeah. And so I'm just thinking about the amount of data that you probably have access to on people. I mean, what do people have to do? I mean, do you ask them to kind of open up their, like their purchase history for people? Like it's, again, I'm not super familiar with Shopify with regards to like, can somebody just do one click? Here you go. You have all my data. Or are you guys ingesting data from other data sources that a company might have to open up and give access to other databases and what?
Yeah, so I think like the types of sources of data that we use would be pretty typical for a recommendation service. Like we definitely have very stringent policies around PII and so forth. None of our machine learning algorithms use like any form of PII, which is cool because we're very keen on being data compliant and not doing anything that's going to get us in trouble or be viewed as a negative by any of our merchants. So any machine learning related technology that even is kind of seen as something that somebody would be upset about, we definitely are very cognizant of that and make sure that our machine learning practices are basically just not questionable, I guess. So we're very careful about that, but basically what we'll use to serve recommendations is what you would think of for like pretty much any recommendation service. We use the product catalog. So just features of the products, all of the information that we have about, descriptions, titles, images, and stuff like that. And then we also use interaction data from the user on the website. So if they're inside of a current session and they click on a certain product and add to cart, you can take that data and kind of use that to personalize what they're going to see next. And it's pretty easy to kind of learn dynamically how you should personalize their experience based on what they're interacting with on the website. And then that, for the most part, is like the core of what we're going to use. The primary reason for that is that like there is data available, or there could be data available in terms of who the customer is and like what they purchased in the past. But typically when somebody visits an e-commerce website, just with how the general flow exists right now, they don't log in prior to searching, browsing, and purchasing stuff on the website. Typically, the workflow that you see is that they come onto the website, they're anonymous, they're going to like add stuff to cart and then proceed to checkout. And then at the checkout part is when they would actually like log in to retrieve whatever payment details that they have. So like that information is there, but the majority of the time, users that are kind of shopping and expecting a personalized experience on a website will actually be anonymous for the majority of the time that they're on the website. So you have to kind of use dynamic interaction data that you get to personalize rather than relying upon having this vast history of things that people have looked at before.
That's interesting. Yeah, no, I hadn't even thought about that. But yeah, you're right. I find myself doing the same thing. I'll add a bunch of stuff to cart, browse around. Sites have no idea who I am until I actually sign in. So that is an interesting challenge. And, it seems like you guys probably wrote all your own proprietary technology. I'm sure you're writing using some open source tools, I guess. Can you share any of those or is it all just pretty much from scratch, everything?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, Rebuy in general, there's some things that we use that are closed source, mostly just like GCP tools like Bigtable and stuff like that. So there are some things that we use that are closed source, but in terms of the ML team, we're very heavily emphasizing open source tools. So like for all of our data exporting and warehousing jobs, we rely upon Prefect. We use Dask for distributed compute. And then pretty much everything that we have is built upon that. We also use like MLflow for a model registry and so forth. But yeah, I think for most of the ML stuff that we do, we're very heavily emphasizing open source just because it tends to, in my opinion, be maintained and faster adapt to stuff that's happening in the ML space. Because things tend to change in ML and deep learning so quickly, it's very important to have tools that will adapt to those changes and kind of meet the expectations of people who are working with them.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and it sounds like a challenging problem, I guess. I mean, one that's been probably, around since Amazon first launched, basically it's like, how are we going to, recommend something to somebody? And I mean, you kind of have to come up with the answer pretty quickly. This system needs to be pretty performant and it needs to be highly tuned, I think, to certain users at the same time. Are you guys going through sort of a continual retraining of this thing? I'm just trying to think kind of how the system would need to be architected.
Yeah. So I think like e-commerce in general is a beautiful space to be in because it's kind of a sandbox for different AI techniques.
Mm,
And one of the really wonderful things that I love about e-commerce is that there's a balance between stuff that needs to be computed offline and stuff that needs to be computed online. So one thing that's like very notable in this space is that all of the products data typically is something that is not changing super quickly. There are some things that change like stock levels, but most of that is not super related to like deep learning. Maybe you can have that as a feature in like a downstream model where it's like if the stock is super high, you can kind of promote it a bit more. But for the most part, most of what you see in the product catalog is not changing super dynamically. And because of that, you can use very, like, I guess, expensive, but just large neural networks to form your understanding of products, which is really cool. So any embedding models or different models that you use to extract information about products, you can use really big models and run them for offline batch inference so that information is available in real time for other applications. So that's like the first part. And that part of like forming product understanding, which in a lot of ways is the core of a lot of things that you'll do in terms of personalization services. You can use really big neural networks, compute it all offline, and there's not like a latency issue, which is really cool. Then the question is, how do you take that information and use it to dynamically adapt, the website based on what a certain user is doing? And the answer is that typically you're using real-time ranking models, right? So what you typically see in recommendations in search, they're pretty similar problems, but also different in some ways. But both of them, and this is argued by some people like kind of propose more complex ways to look at this. But in general, ranking and or recommendations in search are a two-stage process. The first stage is retrieval, which means basically I have some information and I want to use that information, go through all of the products that we have. So could be tons of products and efficiently identify, some subset of 100, maybe 1,000 products that would be most relevant to this scenario. So as a concrete example of that, maybe you're someone who's sitting on a product page. So you're sitting on the page for one particular product on the store, and that's your context. So you want to say, this is the user, this is the product, go find me a subset of things that might be relevant. And this is called filtering or retrieval. So that has to run very quickly because you're going and retrieving over all of these different products. So there are a bunch of different algorithms for that. Like typically for recommendations, it's going to be either content-based or collaborative. So collaborative filtering is like a retrieval algorithm that's very famous, originally proposed by Netflix. And then content-based retrieval is just similar products engine. So one way of doing that is like getting an embedding vector for a product and then running a vector search to find like the 100 most similar products or something like that. So
I see.
all of that is like very fast. You can run that retrieval algorithm. It will go get stuff, give you like 100 or 1,000 products that are roughly kind of considered to be relevant to your current context. And then after that, the question is, how do you decide which one of those products are like the first, second, and third products to be shown? So you have to re-rank them or just rank them based on how relevant they are to the current scenario. And that ranking component is really where the real-time stuff comes in. So for retrieval, you can do a lot of stuff offline. You can compute vectors, and then the retrieval is just running, a vector similarity search online, which is fast. And then the ranking, basically, you just have to train a smaller model that can take the information that you have and rank all of these results based on relevance. So there are like a million different ways to do this. Like one way to do this would be to train just like a regression model that takes the embedding for the current product and an average embedding of like all of the products that a user has concatenates them, and then just predicts like what is the likelihood that the user is going to purchase this product. You could train that over just like a ton of purchase data, and it will predict like likelihood to convert. And then you could just like sort based on that score. You could also use like learning to rank models, which are typically like decision tree based models where you just take all of the information that you have. So it could be, the vector similarity score. It could be the collaborative filtering score, and then information about the product, information about the user. And then you just throw all of those into an XGBoost model that predicts like a score. And then you sort based on that score. So typically, like all of that will happen in real time. So you're constrained to small models or decision trees or something like that. But by kind of dividing search and recommendations into those two components of filtering and then ranking, you can separate it and see that most of the stuff that you do for filtering is offline. There's only one part that's online, which is basically using those offline computed features to run a search. And then most of ranking happens online, but it's just with smaller models, more or less.
Nice. That's fascinating. That's cool. I mean, and who would have known if you go on a website, all that stuff's happening kind of behind the scenes. And so you guys are sort of, like you said, like a plugin on top of Shopify. So essentially API calls that are coming into your guys' data center to do all that churning of all that data and sending it back to the website to present it, right?
Yep. And we're not 100% just on Shopify. So we also have a multi-platform like API offering that we're building out more and more every month. But yes, like for the most part, all of the ML component is just a set of APIs that each have like different functionalities. So we have products APIs that will ingest products and form like all of the vectors that we need for them. We have events and analytics APIs that are taking in like purchase behavior and, kind of learning from that, search APIs, stuff like that. So it's just all of these different components that you would need are kind of packaged up so that you could easily, like a normal developer could use them to do all of the personalization stuff without knowing anything about AI.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. That sounds like an interesting challenge too, to kind of try and support a number of different commerce platforms, I guess, right? I mean, probably a smart way to kind of pick one of the biggest and sort of cut your teeth on that. But boy, I mean, how are you going to support all these other ones? And even just kind of mom and pop shops, right? I mean, it's going to be, well, again, you're working on it and we'll put links to, I mean, is this kind of like in beta? Could I sign up today for a platform that I've already written?
Yeah. So, I mean, Rebuy is not in beta. So on Shopify, you can go onto Shopify now and download Rebuy, where like the top recommendations and soon to be search platforms on Shopify. We have like over, I think at this point, like 7,200 merchants that use Rebuy, which is really cool. A lot of the multi-platform offering is in beta because it's something that we just started working on at the beginning of this year. So until that becomes more developed, I guess it is in beta for now. But yeah, like the strategy there was basically that we built this large customer base on Shopify. Shopify is dominating the space of like just the e-commerce SaaS market. So just the space where people are trying to build e-commerce stores for people or make that really easy to do. And there are other platforms, like I work for Salesforce Commerce, which is another option. There's also like BigCommerce and so forth. There's several different platforms, but the strategy that we had was basically we built Rebuy for Shopify, which is a good thing because Shopify is very dominant in that space and it's a great ecosystem to grow an app like that. But building Rebuy like individually and tightly integrating it into every other platform like we did for Shopify is not like super reasonable to do. So we built Rebuy for Shopify. We're going to maintain that and definitely build upon it and emphasize making that product the best that it could be. And then we're going to build Rebuy for everything else, which is just an API-centric solution to where anybody who wants to use our tools can kind of use them via our developer APIs. And yeah, we're doing our best to create really good documentation, similar to how Shopify creates awesome documentation for all of their APIs. We want to make it kind of easy to work with Rebuy as a developer.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can see you guys kind of being like the Stripe, Stripe can integrate with anything just through API calls if you want to do payment processing. So you guys could be kind of the recommendation and search engine. A lot of that stuff, though, I mean, so if I want, then I need to make API calls to sort of ship you my data, right? So here's this customer, and because you guys need to ingest all of this stuff.
Yeah. So we would have to ingest product data and then just like customer analytics data so that we could adapt to what they're looking at while they're on your store.
Yeah, cool. Well, how have people been talking about? I mean, has the word ChatGPT and large language models and stuff like that shown up in where you guys are looking, particularly probably around search or customers asking for some of these types of tools too?
Yeah, totally. So language models is like one of the areas that I specialize in and I love working on them. So pretty quickly after, Chat GPT came out and people were really psyched about language models, we started developing what we call Rebuy Assistant, which is our language model powered discovery platform. So really what it is just basically an agent system of language models that can ask the shopper questions, kind of understand their preferences and lead them to the products that would be most relevant to them. So it's really like a discovery focused search tool. So instead of like typical search where you put in very specific keywords and expect like a very specific product to come up, Rebuy Assistant is something that you could use when you're not like completely sure about the product that you want to purchase. So you can come to it with a question of like, I'm going on a camping trip soon. What do I need? And does this store sell the products that would be, important for that? And then it can ask you more questions, better understand what you're looking for and guide you to the relevant products. So yeah, we built that. It's been shipped right now. It's actually part of our checkout cart experience. So Rebuy has this checkout cart called Smart Cart, which is like an optimized checkout cart on Shopify that has a ton of one-click recommendations, incentives and stuff like that. It's currently our top selling product, I guess. People use it and they love it because of all the different customizations that you could do to optimize your checkout cart. And right now, Rebuy Assistant is deployed inside of the checkout cart where it will just display a chat bubble or a chat section, I guess, and say, did you find everything that you're looking for today or something like that? So that inside of the checkout cart, if there's anything that you missed or you like might have purchased that you didn't see while you're on the store, you could talk to Rebuy Assistant to try and find other products that might be relevant. And for sure, we're planning on expanding that beyond the checkout cart. That just happened to be like the first place that we shipped it. But overall, search is becoming more of a hybrid experience over time. I think there are different reasons that people will typically go to the search bar, whether it be like discovery focused or searching for something very specific. And language models are incredibly powerful for those discovery focused applications. So when a person doesn't know what they're looking for. So over time, I'm sure that we're going to integrate it more tightly with search, find ways to expose it as like a widget on e-commerce websites, or just basically find the balance and the most intuitive UI to allow people to use it, because it is very useful, but only for a particular type of search. So if you know exactly what you want and then you go into a chat bubble and start talking to a language model, it actually might be more annoying to go through that than to just perform a normal search. So yeah.
Yeah, cool. I just, those are the buzzwords of the day. And I'm sure you guys were already looking at them and thinking about search before ChatGPT kind of came on the scene. One of the things that I do like to ask people that are on program is, do you have any advice for somebody who's maybe coming out of school today and maybe wants to get into this field? Are there books that you've seen? Are there classes that you maybe want people to take? Sounds like they have an awesome program at UT Austin, but are there conferences? How would you advise people on that?
Yeah. I think there's a ton of people that can give like really good advice for how to become a data scientist. So I tend to like recommend people to look at advice that different people give, but the unique aspect of what I've done, there's typical advice of like, you need to go read papers, you need to implement stuff because learning by doing something is way better than just reading about stuff. You need to publish projects on the internet that you've done, find a mentor, so forth. I've definitely done all of those things, but I think the main unique thing that I've experienced that I started pretty early that helped me to kind of more quickly gain opportunities at like Salesforce and beyond was probably making sure that I'm always writing about the stuff that I learn on the internet. So one thing that I started doing very early is that when I got my first internship after my sophomore year of college, I learned a lot. I did a ton of reading about how machine learning works and so forth. And as I was reading about this, I wrote overviews of what I learned on Medium and then just published them. And then after I wrote a few overviews, I got picked up as a writer by Towards Data Science, which I've been writing for them to this day. So That's awesome. Was really cool. And it looks really good on a resume if you have, experience writing for a publication like that. But I've kind of continued that trend of taking the things I learn and read about and writing about them constantly and publishing them for people online. I've continued doing that to this day, whether it be on Twitter or via my newsletter, stuff like that. And through that, I think it's gained me a lot of opportunities simply because people start to see your content and they'll start to contact you to talk to you about various different kinds of things. It could be VCs contacting you about like starting a company. It could be people contacting you to work for them, could be consulting opportunities, but overall, just taking what you learn and writing about it and then publishing it on the internet, to me has been hugely beneficial, almost to the point where I can't overstate enough how important that would be. And it's something that not a lot of people do because it's hard and it requires a ton of effort. Like I publish a new newsletter every week. I probably spend like 10 hours on it every week. And if you have a job as a data scientist, 10 extra hours a week is not trivial because, data scientists have a hard job to get to begin with anyways. So it's hard to do. And because of that, not a lot of people will do it. And because of that, you're more likely to meet people or gain recognition because of that. So it's hugely beneficial.
Love it. No, 100%. I can't agree with you enough. And I think some people, they get done with school, their degree or whatever, and then they're like, I don't need to learn anymore. And I found later in life, actually, I enjoy learning all this stuff, more actually, because I'm learning it and exploring it sort of on my own. And that's one of the reasons for this podcast really is just to meet awesome people and talk with them and just kind of jump into the field. I've been doing this podcast for more than 3 years, but learned so much. And again, back to what you say, you got to regurgitate it, you get it out there and let people see it. And a lot of doors will open for sure. This is a kind of a complete 180 or whatever, but I did want to get back to your MMA stuff, right? And I'm just kind of curious, more personal stuff. How did you get into this? And are you actually finding? I'm like an avid runner. I really got into running marathons about 3 years ago, and so I go out in the morning and I'm always training for something, and it forces me to be focused in the morning. And I take on the task that I hate the most, kind of in the morning, which is getting up early and getting a nice long run in. Do you see any overlaps? Do you see yourself getting into this mixed martial arts because of the work you do, or because of the work you do, you got into it? Do you think it plays at all into this?
Yeah, totally. So first of all, totally agree with getting out of the way the stuff that you don't want to do in the morning. For me, I cannot work out in the morning, so I don't do that. But what I do is the first thing every day that I do is work on my newsletter for like an hour and a half. Because to me, writing about stuff it creates mental friction. It's like one of the hardest things that you could do. So I always do that first thing in the morning, because if I try and do it like after work or something, there's no chance. I'm just going to be too demotivated to actually do it. But in general, my advice would be that for anything that's going to be difficult to do, so learning about AI, becoming an expert in that is extremely difficult and it will take a long time. It requires a lot of focus on that. But at the same time, I found it to be hugely beneficial to have something outside of your main focus that you can also focus on. And the primary reason for that is because, your endeavors in AI or whatever else you're pursuing are not always going to be going well. All of different pursuits, all of life is kind of a sine wave where you have good times, you have bad times. And what I found is that by having something else that you're kind of focusing on, there's a greater likelihood that if you're kind of down in the dumps in your efforts on AI, you feel like you haven't made progress, you're struggling to get like your next job, maybe your papers are getting rejected. There's at least that high likelihood that at the same time, your efforts in like jujitsu or MMA are going pretty well. Maybe you had like a good session where you're training with people, you're being successful using new moves and stuff like that. And that has a huge likelihood to kind of, avoid you from getting too upset about something else that might not be going well. So that's one thing. If you have multiple things that you're doing, the highs and the lows tend to kind of balance each other out. The other thing is that I think there's a ton of benefit just to being active and doing like mental work. So a lot of people, especially now in AI, people will talk about like burnout with like too much stuff going on at once. People talk about just working constantly and stuff like that. To me, there's like diminishing returns with the amount that you work. I try and work a good amount, make sure I'm constantly making progress. But to me, it's just very important to supplement that work with being active, going out and doing stuff and having time away from work, primarily because it will kind of keep you from having burnout, which nobody wants to have. That kind of just pushes you in the opposite directions of your goals always. And oftentimes, if you're like stuck on something, going and being active, whether it be working out, going for a run, doing jujitsu or whatever, I think a lot of people would be surprised how many of their problems they figure out during that time away from their work. So it's important to kind of detach and have that opportunity to think about stuff passively or subconsciously and kind of see if your problems can work themselves out. And that for me has been huge. And when I started jujitsu during my PhD, I guess I wrote 3 papers that had pretty massive like mathematical proofs inside of them. And for all 3 of them, components of those proofs have been figured out during jujitsu or during working out. I'll get stuck on something for multiple days, and the solution never comes when you're like actually working on the proof. It comes when you're kind of thinking about it subconsciously and doing something else. And then you figure out, oh my gosh, this is how you should like actually solve this. And the same thing applies to any other form of work. Just having that time to do something else and detach will give you a lot of clarity in the other areas of your life.
But totally agree, man. Yeah. This has been a great conversation, Cameron. How do people get a hold of you? What's the best way to reach out?
Yeah. So I have a website. It's just CameronRWolfe.me. And you could go there and it will have links to all of my social media channels and so forth. I'm on probably most of the social media channels. So I have a Medium page where I write for Towards Data Science. I have a Substack, which is what I use to host my newsletter. And then I'm also on Twitter, LinkedIn, and now Threads is like the new thing. So yeah, if you go to my website, it links to all of those different things.
That's awesome. Perfect. Well, are there any other topics or things like specifically that maybe you wanted to touch on, or if you think we covered it all? But I usually always ask, hey, I had some questions here, but if there's anything that I might have missed, you're free to bring up.
No, I think the only thing that I like to say, just because a lot of people don't talk about this, but what we see in the AI space right now is that for the first time ever, AI is not just a research topic anymore. My parents are using like ChatGPT, or my mother-in-law uses ChatGPT. She's a real estate agent and she'll rewrite some of her listing descriptions with ChatGPT. So for the first time ever, AI is bridged to like the gap of being a research topic, and it's now something that appears in popular culture. And because of that, it's now on AI researchers and practitioners, people who know how this technology works, to develop their ability to discuss these topics with other people and explain them very clearly. So that's something that I like to always say is just like anybody who's working on AI, think about how these things works. Think about how you can explain them to your parents. Like it's your duty from now on to make sure that people who use this tech understands how it works and aren't using it in like malicious ways or whatever. So yeah.
That's a whole topic. I think we could talk about the malicious use of AI maybe the next time you're on the program. But yeah, and I think you're right. The unveiling of ChatGPT kind of democratized, I guess, this tool to allow anybody basically to come in and start typing on it. And the fact of the matter is, obviously, it's been around for quite some time, right? I mean, that was GPT-3. There were 3 other incarnations before it, right? So it was a unique time. Obviously, a unique company did it. They got enough data and they made it in such a way that was easy to use, which is awesome. But yeah, I'm 100% with you with regards to, again, and also not letting people go off the deep end either. Like kind of rein them back in a little bit. This is just mathematics really at the end of the day. It's fancy math in a lot of ways. It's choosing the next best word to use, but people can totally go way too far with this when they don't really understand it.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
That's what you're saying. Is we got to be good stewards of it. We got to explain it in a practical terms, what it means.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of just knowledge that a lot of people that work on these things have that would be useful to other people. And, it doesn't always take, a beautiful, intuitive explanation of language models to communicate useful information to people. It could be even as simple as, these models have a tendency to hallucinate, which means that they can make up factual information that's not correct. And a lot of people are using these models, treat them like a search engine, for example. So even at the most basic level of just taking facts that are practically useful to people that are using these models that they may not know, if we can learn to communicate with other people and just kind of find ways to make this information intuitive for them to understand, it could be hugely beneficial for pretty much everyone.
Well said. Well, thanks again, Cameron, for your time, for being on the podcast today. I really enjoyed the conversation. And yeah, we'll drop links to all the stuff that we talked about here on the stuff on Toward Data Science and your newsletter, everything like that. We'll have those here for people to download and subscribe. So thanks again. I appreciate the time.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
You've listened to another episode of the Conversations on Applied AI podcast. We hope you are eager to learn more about applying artificial intelligence and deep learning within your organization. You can visit us at appliedai.mn to keep up to date on our events and connect with our amazing community. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Justin at appliedai.mn if you are interested in participating in a future episode. Thank you for listening.